We've all heard it. That manic, piercing laugh that signals chaos is about to erupt. For nearly a century, Woody Woodpecker has been drilling holes not just in trees, but in human psychology itself. Notice the pattern? A small bird with a ridiculous laugh provokes supposedly rational adults into abandoning dignity, reason, and proportion. Within seconds, judges throw off their robes, generals forget their strategies, and ordinary people transform into raging fools. This isn't just comedy, it's a stress test of character. If a cartoon bird can break you, what chance do you have against life's real provocateurs? Woody operates as both fox and trap-setter, exposing what Machiavelli understood centuries ago. Appearances of power often mask profound fragility. Today, we'll dissect this avian Machiavelli's playbook, not to create manipulators, but to recognize manipulation, strengthen our boundaries, and understand why we react when the woodpecker knocks. When we say Woody exposes weakness, what exactly do we mean? Human weakness isn't physical frailty, but predictable behavioral patterns under pressure. It's the principal who abandons procedure when mocked, the homeowner who destroys his own house to catch a bird, the authority figure who sacrifices dignity for revenge. Woody isn't a straightforward villain. He's a trickster, a symbolic archetype that appears across world mythologies as a boundary-crossing provocateur who reveals social fault lines. Like Loki or Coyote, he functions as a mirror reflecting our attachments, insecurities, and inflexibility. Our analysis operates on 3 levels. 1. Archetypal, Woody as eternal trickster figure. 2. Machiavellian, power dynamics, appearance management, strategic manipulation. 3. Social psychology, pattern recognition in human behavior under stress. This isn't merely academic. By understanding how a cartoon woodpecker consistently manipulates humans, we gain insight into real social dynamics that shape our lives. The trickster teaches through discomfort, our ethical guardrail. We study these patterns to protect ourselves and others, not to harm. Knowledge without conscience creates monsters. Knowledge with conscience creates wisdom. Before analyzing Woody's techniques, we need to understand Machiavelli's core concepts, not as endorsements, but as diagnostic tools. Niccolò Machiavelli, writing in 16th century Florence, created the first modern analysis of power dynamics in his infamous work, The Prince. While often mischaracterized as simply advocating ruthlessness, Machiavelli was actually mapping human behavior under pressure, much like our woodpecker does. First, virtù versus fortuna. Fortuna is unpredictable chance. Virtù is skillful adaptation. Woody exemplifies this balance perfectly. He creates chaos, fortuna, then navigates it with agile tactics, virtù, while his targets flail helplessly. Second, the fox and lion dichotomy. The lion represents force, the fox represents cunning. Successful operators need both qualities, but Woody almost exclusively employs fox tactics, deception, misdirection, and psychological warfare rather than direct confrontation. Third, appearances over reality. As Machiavelli notes, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Woody manipulates appearances constantly, donning disguises, creating false contexts, and managing impressions that override rational assessment. Fourth, necessita, the principle that decisive action, even if seemingly harsh, can prevent greater suffering. In comedy, this manifests as the quick gag that releases tension. In strategy, it's the boundary that prevents escalation. Understanding these concepts doesn't mean endorsing cruelty. Rather, seeing the game clearly allows us to participate consciously rather than reactively, or choose not to play at all. Woody Woodpecker belongs to an ancient lineage of trickster figures that spans cultures and centuries. Hermes in Greece, Loki in Norse mythology, Anansi in West Africa, coyote in Native American traditions. These tricksters share defining characteristics that Woody perfectly embodies. Boundary breaking. Tricksters ignore conventional limits, literally drilling through walls and metaphorically penetrating social barriers. Notice how often Woody's gags involve invasions of private property or protected spaces. Role flipping. The trickster constantly inverts power relationships. Woody, small, seemingly insignificant, consistently humiliates larger, ostensibly more powerful opponents. Comedic inversion. Tricksters use humor as weaponized dissonance. Woody's signature laugh isn't merely annoying, it's a declaration that the normal rules have been suspended. Status pricking. The trickster specifically targets pride and pretension. Woody rarely bothers humble characters, but relentlessly torments the self-important. The psychological function of the trickster is revelatory, not merely destructive. By provoking reactions, Woody exposes rigidities in systems and psyches, particularly pride, which Machiavelli identified as a dangerous vulnerability in leaders. Even Woody's appearance serves strategic purposes. His bright coloration and distinctive crest make him conspicuous, simultaneously a provocation and a form of camouflage. We're so distracted by his outrageous appearance that we miss his tactical maneuvering until it's too late. Like all tricksters, Woody forces a question. If a system breaks under pressure, was it truly stable to begin with? If authority dissolves when challenged, was it legitimate authority? Woody's victims don't fail randomly. They fail along predictable fault lines that exist in real human psychology. By mapping these vulnerabilities, we can recognize and fortify them in ourselves. Ego fragility. The disproportionate response to minor disrespect. Watch how judges, professors, and officials abandon their responsibilities at the slightest mockery from Woody. Their self-image is so brittle that maintaining it overrides their primary duties. Authority bias. Our tendency to comply with symbols of authority without verification. Woody regularly exploits this by donning uniforms, carrying clipboards, or speaking authoritatively, gaining immediate compliance through appearances alone. Reactance. The psychological resistance triggered when freedom is threatened. Woody intentionally creates small impositions that trigger massive counter-reactions, making targets feel trapped and escalating their responses. Fairness fixation. Our obsession with getting even rather than achieving goals. Targets abandon self-interest to pursue Woody, falling into tit-for-tat spirals where winning becomes more important than well-being. Social optics. Fear of looking foolish that overrides rational self-interest. Characters refuse to disengage from Woody's provocations because walking away feels like losing face. What makes cartoons such perfect laboratories for these patterns is compression. They isolate and exaggerate psychological tendencies that operate more subtly in real life. When a cartoon character abandons $1 million home to chase a woodpecker, we laugh at the absurdity while uncomfortably recognizing our own disproportionate reactions to provocations. These aren't just comedy formulas. They're diagnostic tools for human behavior under stress. Let's examine one of Woody's most consistent patterns, the boundary test. This routine appears in dozens of cartoons and represents a fundamental social dynamic. The sequence follows a predictable pattern. 1. Woody signals approach. Knocking, calling out. 2. Without waiting for permission, he immediately intrudes. 3. The target freezes momentarily, caught between social politeness and boundary enforcement. 4. In that moment of hesitation, Woody establishes presence and escalates. What's revealing is the target's response. Rather than immediately ejecting the intruder, they often nervously laugh while looking uncomfortable. Over-explain why Woody can't be there. Offer alternatives or compromises. Display displaced anger. Calm with Woody, furious with others. From a Machiavellian perspective, this illustrates a crucial principle. Unguarded gates invite opportunists. The initial boundary crossing is a test. If met with hesitation, it signals that further incursions will be tolerated. This doesn't just happen in cartoons. Research shows that manipulators systematically test boundaries with small violations, calibrating their next moves based on the response. The principle applies in workplaces, relationships, and public spaces. The defense isn't aggression, but clarity, establishing early, neutral, specific boundaries before escalation becomes necessary. Notice how characters who immediately, calmly state and enforce limits rarely become entangled in Woody's schemes. They're simply not interesting targets because they offer no psychological leverage. Perhaps Woody's most Machiavellian tactic is his masterful use of authority costumes, visual shortcuts that trigger automatic compliance. The pattern is remarkably consistent. 1. Woody appears in contextually appropriate authority dress. 2. He adopts brisk, confident body language and speech patterns. 3. Targets immediately comply without verifying credentials. 4. By the time the deception is discovered, Woody has achieved his objective. What's fascinating is how minimal these disguises often are. Sometimes just a hat and clipboard are sufficient to gain access to secure locations or compliance with absurd demands. This tactic works because humans are efficiency machines. We use visual shortcuts to make rapid judgments rather than performing thorough verification, especially under time pressure or in familiar contexts. Machiavelli understood that governing appearances is often more important than governing reality. The prince who seems legitimate commands more authority than one who is legitimate, but appears weak. The psychological principle at work is authority bias, our tendency to comply with symbols of authority rather than verified authority itself. Studies show people will administer what they believe are dangerous electric shocks to others simply because someone in a lab coat tells them to continue. The defense against this manipulation isn't paranoia, but procedural thinking. Pause before compliance. Verify credentials regardless of appearance. Slow the tempo of the interaction. Separate appearance from permission. The most powerful question against this tactic is disarmingly simple. Could you help me understand who you are and why you're authorized to make this request? One of Woody's signature routines perfectly illustrates Machiavellian frame control, the provoked giant sequence. The choreography is precise. 1. Woody performs minor but persistent provocations, poking, mimicking, small thefts. 2. The target exercises restraint initially, appearing mature. 3. Provocations continue until restraint breaks. 4. The target overreacts spectacularly, often causing collateral damage. 5. Bystanders witness only the overreaction, not the provocations. The genius of this tactic is the frame reversal. The initial aggressor, Woody, becomes perceived as the victim, while the actual victim appears to be the villain. This is achieved through selective visibility. Provocations are subtle, reactions are obvious. Proportionality manipulation. The response appears disproportionate without context. Third-party optics. Bystanders judge based on incomplete information. This isn't just cartoon logic, it's a documented social dynamic. Research on workplace bullying shows that reactive victims are often punished, while calculated provocateurs escape consequences. The person who finally snaps after prolonged harassment frequently becomes labeled as unstable. The frame, the definition of what's happening here, determines how others respond, regardless of actual events. Whoever controls the frame controls the narrative. The defense against this tactic requires frame awareness. Recognize when you're being baited into overreaction. Explicitly name the dynamic. I notice you're trying to provoke a reaction. Reframe the interaction. I'm choosing not to participate in this. Exit with dignity rather than escalating. Behind Woody's antics lies a sophisticated understanding of social mechanics that can be broken down into 3 components: hooks, frames, and loops. The hook, the initial engagement device that demands response. Woody's laugh, a knock on the door, a whistle, or a small theft, all designed not for their intrinsic value, but to provoke engagement. The hook creates what game theorists call forced play, a situation where non-response feels more costly than response. The frame. The context definition that shapes interpretation. Woody excels at establishing frames, presenting himself as inspector, victim, helper, or emergency responder. The frame determines which behaviors seem appropriate and which seem absurd. The loop, the cyclical interaction pattern that reinforces the manipulator's control. Once a target responds within Woody's frame, they validate it and become trapped in an escalating cycle where each reaction strengthens the manipulator's position. When Woody meets resistance, he doesn't force the same approach. He pivots to new frames. Service, I'm here to help. Emergency, there's a problem only I can solve. Or comedy, isn't this amusing? This flexibility makes him particularly difficult to counter. The defense against these mechanics requires meta-awareness. Recognize the hook. This is designed to provoke me. Name the frame. This person is positioning as X to achieve Y. Break the loop. Choose non-participation or set an alternative frame. Maintain proportionality. Respond to the pattern, not the provocation. Understanding these mechanics transforms us from reactive participants to conscious observers. Stepping back from individual tactics, we can now see why Machiavelli would indeed approve of Woody's approach, not as a moral endorsement, but as recognition of effective strategy. Optics rule. Machiavelli understood that perception management often trumps reality management. Woody's genius lies not in having actual power, but in creating the appearance of legitimacy, control, or victimhood as needed. He demonstrates that seeming is often more operationally valuable than being. The fox mentality. Machiavelli's ideal prince combines the strength of a lion with the cunning of a fox. Woody embodies pure fox energy, recognizing traps, setting traps, and using intelligence rather than force to achieve objectives. Necessary severity. Machiavelli advocated decisive action rather than half measures. When Woody strikes, he doesn't hesitate or apologize. He commits fully to his strategy, making clean breaks rather than prolonging conflicts. However, Machiavelli would note a crucial limitation in Woody's approach: sustainability. Rulers need legitimacy and trust to maintain power. Tricksters burn social capital with each deception. Woody works as a character precisely because he exists outside social consequences, a luxury real humans don't have. The trickster archetype offers short-term victories but long-term isolation. True Machiavellian wisdom lies in balancing tactical cunning with strategic relationship building. Understanding manipulative tactics doesn't obligate us to use them. The ethical dimension of our analysis requires distinguishing between descriptive knowledge, how things work, and prescriptive application, how we should act. The trickster tradition contains its own ethical boundaries. Across cultures, tricksters typically target excessive pride, abuse of power, rigid thinking, hypocrisy, cruelty masked as order. They rarely target the vulnerable, the humble, children, those already suffering. This punch-up, not-down principle distinguishes meaningful social commentary from mere bullying. Woody typically targets authority figures, the self-important, and the rigid, not the already marginalized. A personal code for ethical application might include transparency where possible, consent rather than manipulation, proportional responses, preference for wit over harm, boundary setting rather than boundary violation. Even Machiavelli, often mischaracterized as amoral, understood that reputation is capital. Destroy your credibility through deception, and eventually the city closes its gates to you. The truly sophisticated operator maintains trust even while understanding the mechanics of manipulation. Knowledge without conscience creates monsters. Knowledge with conscience creates wisdom. Let's translate our cartoon analysis into practical protection in 3 common contexts. Workplace woodpeckers. Verify authority claims through official channels. Document interactions with manipulative colleagues. Time box interruptions. I can give you 5 minutes now or schedule time later. Establish clear escalation paths for boundary violations. Focus on objectives rather than winning conflicts. Dating and social dynamics. Watch for test loops. Small boundary violations that escalate if permitted. Use boundary statements. That doesn't work for me, rather than explanations. Reward mutuality, not provocation or pursuit. Trust patterns over promises or appearances. Exit relationships where manipulation is persistent. Online interactions. Recognize engagement baiting, the digital equivalent of Woody's poke. Don't feed trolls. They use reaction as fuel. Screenshot trails create accountability. Mute or block early rather than escalating. Remember the audience effect. Public responses perform for spectators. Community norms matter enormously. When groups collectively enforce boundaries, manipulative tactics lose their ROI. The isolated target is vulnerable. The community with shared standards is resilient. Personal practices that reduce vulnerability. Adequate sleep. Decision quality drops with fatigue. Status hygiene. Less concern about looking foolish. Humor as de-escalation rather than domination. As we close our analysis of this feathered Machiavelli, remember that Woody Woodpecker isn't just a cartoon character. He's a mirror reflecting our social vulnerabilities. Where you flinch, overreact, or perform under his provocations, there lies a lever someone could pull. Machiavelli would certainly nod in appreciation at Woody's tactical brilliance, while perhaps warning about its strategic limitations. Be fox enough to see the traps, lion enough to hold your ground, and human enough to choose when each approach serves integrity. The trickster tradition reminds us that systems too rigid to bend eventually break. Sometimes we need a red-crested chaos agent to reveal where our boundaries need strengthening and our responses need moderation. Keep the laugh, drop the cruelty, maintain the wit, add the conscience. If you've enjoyed this exploration of dark philosophy through animated archetypes, share in the comments a scene where maintaining composure defeated chaos, and subscribe for our next analysis of pop culture's hidden wisdom.